were in the Navy, in the law, the wine industry, did a lot of traveling. How you came about the number of different lives. How did you go through all that? Like, how did you get from one point to the other?
First, you need a very, very understanding and supportive wife, is what happened. I felt like during COVID, whereas we were being told if somebody doesn't want this, they are this. They are being
Mhm.
dangerous. They are trying to kill you. That is basically the message we were getting. And that is such an unhealthy way of trying to think about the other possible viewpoints. And like when I step back now in retrospect, and this is why I try to go to South Carolina, and I'd love to go to other parts of the country, is like, we're in New York City, it's like 26,000 people per square mile. Go to
Yeah.
Montana or Wyoming, it's 5 people per square mile. I mean,
Mhm.
should we be surprised that somebody who lives in that kind of setting thinks very differently than us? So to
Yeah.
sit here and to sit at home and get frustrated with the news or frustrated with politics because people who live in a completely different setting than you, might as well live on a different planet, see
Yeah.
differently than you, and to get angry and frustrated and disgusted and become hopeless is just, I mean, it's ludicrous when you step back on and think about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I feel like what I'm doing, and this is why I reached out to you, I felt like is kind of part of why I think what I'm doing is kind of very relevant to mental health. It's that ability to kind of understand the rest of the world in a way that'll make you feel maybe less aggravated and
Yeah.
more compassionate and more curious. And I use four core values: curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. And I would dare say I've done the mental exercises in my head, but I cannot think of a scenario where if you don't lead with those four core values, you
Yeah.
can't get along with almost anyone. Doesn't mean you're going to agree, and it certainly
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're going to love them, but you can coexist in a productive way.
Welcome back to the Maley Way. I'm your host, Jim Maley. Today's guest didn't just wake up one day and start his nonprofit. It was a lifetime in the making. A former Navy officer, a corporate attorney, got into the wine industry, became a world traveler, and now the founder of American Tributaries, helping students experience different parts of the country and break down the division that exists in our country. This is about turning frustration into purpose. And it kind of reminds me what I've been doing with my platform is turning struggle into a purpose. And I'll be honest, I was a little concerned about this one at first because I didn't really want to get in to politics. But after talking to Michael on the phone, it's not necessarily really what this is all about. This is more about your civic health. It's about the ability to talk to one another. It's ability to listen to one another. And it's a way to kind of find a way to move forward without all the division and hatred. And I think that's something all of us can and probably should get behind. So with that, I welcome Michael Whidden to the Maley Way podcast. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thanks so much, Jim. It's really a pleasure to be on the podcast with you, and I appreciate all you're doing by giving voice to, I guess, the different elements of, I guess, mental struggle and emotional struggle that people are going with, and having a chance to talk to you about, I guess, my journey into developing my not-for-profit.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you coming on. And I think, well, we're going to get into it later, but I do think the political landscape, as well as COVID, was something that kind of pushed me into like my darkest time. And I'd be lying if that didn't play a factor. I think for people who struggle with mental health, a lot of times like uncertainty is really bothersome, and everything was uncertain, and it still is a little bit uncertain. But I think if we can find a way to, I don't know, make our world a little bit smaller at times while also acknowledging what's going on, I think that definitely helps me. So I appreciate you coming on to talk about it. But
Lucky to have my wife Christy of many, many years, despite all the challenges that I've given. But I think I guess I've kind of looked at it. I mean, I guess as a journey with kind of maybe an undefined kind of a goal. Just trying to really, I guess, do the best I can with what I've been doing. And I think what really happened was as I got kind of closer to kind of formulating this idea, I realized that the different parts of my background did kind of have kind of played a part, an important part. For me, I was a ROTC in college. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and our
Well,
and
we know you're smart. You went to
well,
university. We
yeah, no,
know
I don't know.
that.
Then going to the Navy, I served overseas in Japan on the USS Bunker Hill, and I think serving my country was kind of something that really kind of immersed me. And I'd say probably this is probably the foundational part of what I'm doing now, because like when you're in the Navy, you are and you're out on a ship, you truly are like dependent on everybody on that ship. And I'll take it to like I was on a cruiser which has about like I don't know 300 to 500 people, but we'll take it one step further because if you think about an aircraft carrier is literally a floating city, and you'll have 5,000 people on that, and everybody has a part to play. I like to refer to Top Gun. If you recall the
Oh yeah.
beginning of Top Gun, Tom Cruise and the F-14, F-16s will get launched off the aircraft carrier during sunrise. And I always get choked up at that part of the movie at the beginning because, as glamorous as it is for those pilots, that kind of exhilarating, kind of cool launch is really just the result of like hundreds and thousands of people working together to make that happen. And it
Mhm.
needs everybody. It needs guys who are good in, reading navigation charts. It needs guys who are good with cryptography, guys who can speak Arabic and listen in on, certain airwaves, and guys who want to handle jet fuel, and guys who want to swab decks, and all those different people with all those different interests have different backgrounds and hidden different viewpoints.
Mhm.
And when you realize when you're on the Navy and you're on that ship, that like as an existential matter, your well-being and your livelihood depends on every single person, and you don't have the luxury of saying like, I don't like this person for any reason, much less because of politics. So I think that was something, frankly, personally, I had probably gotten away from. But when I thought about the current times and how I was feeling, I realized like that's got to be my reference point because I actually experienced it to say I have to get back to that idea of realizing we are all codependent, we are all interconnected with each other, and we don't have the luxury of just saying, you're out of my life because you think differently than me or view things differently than me. And like I said, I wasn't always like that, and I think I had gone down a different path, but I'm I think I'm happy with myself that I'm trying to return to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like as you were talking, I came up with a question I didn't necessarily have planned, but as you're like being part of the military service, to me, I'm a former athlete. To me, that is like the ultimate team. Like what you're just describing, it's the ultimate team. And I think one of the best things for me as an athlete was when I got to college, I'm around different people. I was kids from Croatia were on my team, inner city African American kids were on my team. And I just felt like the locker room was just a great place to like just talk and be yourself and learn from other people. And I feel like you're kind of saying that about the military. Now, here's my question though. I've heard a lot. I've heard some people talk about like having mandatory national service, not necessarily military, but just mandatory service where you are working together with different groups of people. And I know other countries have done it successfully. What would your thoughts be on that as someone who served?
I think I think the idea of getting more people to interact with people from other areas and backgrounds is a worthy and frankly necessary objective. I think I'd almost rather look at like I'd like to think that we should aspire to inspire people to want to serve.
Yeah.
Less than making it mandatory, I'd rather try to inspire them. Because I think that's if you make it mandatory, I guess they'll get something out of it. But I can just picture the ways people will try to get out of it and whatever
Mhm.
loopholes. So to me, I would rather, yeah, I think I'd love to do that, but I'd love to be more of like an inspirational thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what my thought. Well, I like the concept of it, but I just feel like it might not necessarily be practical to be able to do that. But I like what you're saying too, like inspiring people to like realize how good this could be for you. And
Like the
learning.
Peace Corps or
Yeah.
AmeriCorps. I mean, there are programs that do good that and I think maybe and that's part of it, like even like in some of the in the high schools in the New York City, a lot of the kids have required 40 hours or whatever, it could be X amount of hours of like public service, community service. And I think it's great that the kids are getting like somehow immersed in it, but I think it's looked at more as like I've got to satisfy this versus like I want to do this. And I
Mhm.
think what I would want is more just kind of trying to inspire like a lifetime of engagement and awareness of the rest of the country. So
Mhm. Yeah. And okay, so you served in that ultimate team structure. So I guess you've probably gotten different things out of different areas of life, whether it be when you were a lawyer, whether you when you got into the wine industry. What did you take from those different aspects of your life that you think you are using now?
well, I think what I'd say from law is I think really actually it's funny that maybe I reached this conclusion, maybe it isn't, but I think I respect also the limitations of the law and the limitations of contracts and limitations of even like, looking for things to be, ruled on by the Supreme Court or something. I think, one of the things I recall learning in constitutional law was just like the fact like the Supreme Court doesn't have any enforcement mechanisms. So like to the extent it's going to get ahead of where things are, it just has to do it carefully from the point of view of just practically it can't enforce anything. But I think more than that, I think that as a citizen, we can't be looking to other people to kind of fix the problem. I think we can all do little things in our own world to try to move things along and to try to get things that we believe in accepted in a larger sense. So, I mean, to me, I think the idea of trying to get people to understand my viewpoint, I can have that kind of judicially enforced, or I could try maybe the longer game, but just try to be a, I think I don't know if it's a decent person, but a person that people could relate to, who'd be willing
Mhm.
to kind of step into my shoes. So I guess it's that idea of inspiration again. Like I'd like to inspire somebody to step into my shoes, and I'm not going to do that if I come across too adversarially.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you just legislate it or you just judicially require it, you're not going to have somebody do that willingly.
Yeah. Well, and then when you got into your current role, like you work, well, tell us what you currently are
So,
doing. Yeah.
so right now, so currently, I work in wine and spirits distribution, and while that doesn't seem to be related to anything that I'm doing now with American Tributaries, the 16 years that I've been in this business have really let me expose me to a far broader swath of people than I would when I was just a lawyer working at like a white shoe firm, dealing with other people who are lawyers or people with MBAs, so I'm out on the street talking to different kinds of business owners, talking to people. So that and then kind of really living a life where you see how much connection can happen at a dinner table, I think is really what kind of like was the takeaway that I've taken from this, which is just that, we've got to be able to sit down at a table and talk to somebody and learn about them. And it could be over wine, but it could be over a cup of coffee. It could be over it could be over tea, it could be whatever. But we have to be able to talk with somebody, and food is like the ultimate connector. It connects us with our heritage, it connects us with the person across the table, it connects us through the food chain. So I do incorporate I guess that theme in our trips.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, see, I think what you're doing now, I think, is like almost, I don't want to say more, well, kind of more important in terms of like if you want to get your message across, like you are building a community, it seems like. You're working on your communication. Like it's funny, like I'm sure you might have been the same way. What growing up, like I was like super focused, like grades, grades, grades. Let's go to the whatever school I can go to. I ended up going to Northwestern, albeit I wasn't Northwestern smart. I was basketball player at Northwestern smart, which I always say. But then I transferred to Holy Cross, and that's when I really felt like I like learned a lot of different skills that, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I didn't know I was going to be a PE teacher, health teacher. Like I just knew I wanted to get into coaching at the time. So I got into this. But now, like that, I'm doing this whole podcast and I'm going and speaking in front of people. Like I kind of realized I got a lot of things wrong growing up. Like I was way too focused on like the grade as opposed to what I could learn. And what I could learn is like those communication skills, those community building skills that I think I've learned throughout teaching. It sounds like your experience in the wine industry has gotten you almost in a better position to make the difference that you're trying to make.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I mean, it's also a complicated industry, and I think maybe that's also what gives me pause because the alcohol industry, certainly has can have a negative impact on certain people, and I think it makes me. I think one of the things that I guess again how it kind of connects back to what I'm doing is realizing that really very few of us, I don't think of like teachers, like I don't know
Yeah.
many others. Most of us who are doing something where there can be a negative consequence to what we're doing.
Yeah.
If you work in social media, you do lots of good, but there's also a negative part to it. If you make cars can kill people. If you like, there are so many things. You can make Legos, but you're contributing to, old plastics that go into the environment.
Mhm.
So there's just lots of different things where like all of us are kind of doing the best we can, and all of us I mean, most of us are doing something that has can have a mixed impact on society. And but then again, I think that's almost the nature of human beings. It's like we're all trying the best we can, and our impact in the world is a mix of positive and negative.
Yeah.
And you
No, and
just
I
try to
think
make sure it's a little bit more positive than negative.
right, right. And I think what you're doing now we're going to get into the American tributaries thing. Before I do, I wanted to ask you a question about that. Like I have never really heard of something like that. Did that exist back something like that exist when you were growing up? Like having kids, and we're going to get into exactly what it is, but having kids travel around the country and like experience different things. Or is this something like new? Like I just have never really heard of that before.
I think, the like what when I was growing up, we didn't have the means to be traveling anywhere, so I don't know. But I think like schools, at least in the on the Northeast, like you might have a weekend trip to Boston or Philadelphia or Washington D.C. So I think to the extent there are domestic trips, they're usually like that, or it's like a spring break trip,
Yeah,
go
right.
to Fort Lauderdale or something. And any of the real travel opportunities that are available are for kids to go overseas. And I think that's one that ties to like, language, it just kind of the immersion in something completely different, which has certainly its merits. But I think, my sentiments and what kind of spurred this whole idea was just kind of the thinking that, what, like I've traveled all over and I'm very fortunate especially for somebody who never traveled when I was growing up, but I've seen lots of different countries and continents um, but I've actually never really explored my own country with the same kind of curiosity and ardor that I've done with the rest of the world. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to return to and inspire in others.
Yeah, and how did you like what got you to be like, you know what, I'm just gonna start this? Like, I know you from what I read, like part of it was you were raising your own kids at the time. They were like right around that high school or right before high school level age. Like, how did that like influence you to do what you're doing?
Well, the real catalyst when I think back to it, that got me focused on this particular direction was we were on vacation in Hilton Head, South Carolina in 2021, and my wife and I were talking with this couple, and just making small talk while we were like waiting for a fireworks show to start. And they were telling us about where they were from. They were from Oklahoma City, and then they asked us where we were from, and we said we were from New York, and their quip, and this is like still very much in the height of like the pandemic anxiety and stuff. But when they heard where we were from, New York City, they said, huh, must be nice to get away from those crazy Democrats.
Yeah.
And and I think I'd already started my journey enough to I think process that in the right way, which I mean, I did say to them later on, just like, by the way, we're those crazy Democrats. But more importantly, I realized that like I don't really know anything about Oklahoma City. Like I know nothing about Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So as much as they might have made that comment, they know more about New York City than I know about where they're from. And I was like, that's on me. So I've got
Mhm.
to try to learn more about this country. So I started reading a book about Oklahoma called Boomtown, which was kind of really cool. And it just got me thinking, like, oh my God, this is a different world. There's a different history. Oklahoma City was founded in 1886, and, you know, they're only around for 140 years. And in New York City, after 140 years from its founding, we hadn't even had the, Declaration of Independence yet. Like it's our whole country is this kind of patchwork of different people and different histories. Like we're not even all having the same history because some areas have been around for 400 years and other areas have been around for 100 years. Shoot, like we
Yeah.
have cities that kind of spring up out of nowhere. Las Vegas was like nothing, like
Mhm. Yeah.
50,
Right.
60 years ago. And then all of a sudden it's this huge raging, metropolis. So I guess it was that got me thinking about, what, I really don't know anything about this country. I want to learn more. I'm so curious now. And I mean, I say that with kind of real, I guess a real kind of passion and emphasis on like the health to have a healthy civic body that can kind of manage its own responsibilities as a democracy. Because at the end of the day, as a democracy, it's not the politicians' fault, it's our fault. We're the ones
Right. Yeah.
electing all the leaders. So if the
Yeah.
leaders aren't that good, it's shame on us.
Yeah.
And we're only going to get better if we get to be better citizens. And the best way to do that, in my mind, is to get to know the other citizens out there and to help them get to know us in a way that's not controversial or in a way that's not kind of confrontational.
Yeah. When I think there, like, as a mental health podcast, like, there is like that mental health component to that, like, just getting like fired up immediately, as opposed to like what you're saying, like, "Hey, I gotta see where this person is coming from. Like, I can't just like fly off the handle right away," which I was doing that in like COVID times. Like, I was really doing that. And, I've learned over time, like, most people I've found to be pretty good people. Like I've just found that most people, but we see all these like clips and things like that, and you think like just because someone disagrees with you that they're like a horrible person. But what I've found is that's not usually the case if you just kind of talk to them. That's why I think it's cool what you're doing with this American Tributaries. You're trying to, get people to see different things and see different sides of things. Now, how did you exactly go about starting that? I know you had your own kids. You had like a big political moment. I think you said like that January 6th moment.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, I mean, so I guess the January 6th moment was just more like I remember I was visiting a client, my friend John DeFelice, who he ran a wine shop in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, and I was visiting with him and one of his coworker, and then like we just saw the stuff happening on the news, and it was otherworldly. It was like seeing some kind of nightmarish movie, and I really did like kind of feel like somebody just pulled the carpet out from under me. And
Mhm.
I was really went into like a tailspin. I remember that night, like I don't know some of the kids said something, but I was like screaming at them, like, "We're sitting here talking about this, but there's people climbing all over the Capitol," and and it left me really sick to my stomach, and I feeling more helpless and more vulnerable than even I'd been when I was in the military.
Mhm.
Just because I was like, this is the foundational structure of our country, and it's been overrun by people who are that angry.
Yeah.
And I kind of really went into like I was even a shell, but like kind of panic mode where I was like, okay, I don't know if we're gonna have a country. Like that's where my mind was at. So I, ran to Target and spent $700 on supplies to make sure I had
Yeah.
enough to get by, and like it was just crazy. Um, but and it took a while to kind of come out of that. And I should kind of say like there's an organization called Braver Angels that is this kind of bridge building organization that has really been I think fantastic. And this woman Monica Guzman wrote a book called I Never Thought of It That Way, which was kind of these were like some of like the initial lifelines for me that were just like, oh wait a second, this is the way out. Um, but that was where I felt my worst. And I think what I realized as I was kind of slowly coming out of it, and now that I look back with, 5 years later, was I think it was that sense of powerlessness. It was that sense of kind of like no hope, no future, and just I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And I think I would say like a lot of, anxiety that we all feel is by seeing newscasts of things that are happening in, just forget about local news, but just in other parts of the country or other parts, other counties, anything beyond your immediate bubble where you don't know enough about it, you can't fix it, and yet you're being confronted with all these images and these fears that make you feel like you're under assault. You can watch news clips from Iran or from Gaza, and you feel like you're there in the middle of the war, and the news media is not, it's not a, to me, I don't consider it a conspiracy. I just consider the incentive system is such that they're going to, every one of them is showing us the most eye-catching thing. And all those
Mhm.
eye-catching things are things that are going to invoke a sense of, I think, terror more than any.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what truth, like what is the truth, like the truth, like, and
Yeah.
that's what has frustrated me, and I know it's frustrated a ton of people, and it's led to me being like, I'm just gonna step away. I'm not even gonna. And I know part of that is bad, but I think part of it is kind of what you're saying. Like, I got to do something to make this world better that I can actually do, that I can make an impact. I can have a purpose. And I think I've found that, with my mental health thing. And I'm thinking about it from the perspective of like, if I want to make a change, like especially inner city Chicago, where I'm from, like there's some issues. But I think one of the biggest issues is the mental health aspect. Like we don't have, I taught in that area and there was
Mm.
no resources. Now I'm in the suburbs. Like we have everything out here. But down there, like there were no mental health resources for kids who were desperately in need of that. And I think about like, I'm not gonna like vote. Like you said, I can't really change things. I can't change politics, but I can change how I live my life and hopefully make a change. And I think there's total value to that.
Yeah, and I think part of it is also like, those images that you're seeing. I think have all become conditioned to think what we see on our screen is more truthful than what we experience. But I would
Mhm.
just say like anybody you talk to who has done a drive across the country or who's visited different parts of the country, if they, they'll come back to saying like, I had a good time. I met nice people. They weren't confronted with the extremes that we see in the news. And I
Yeah,
think it's also, just to think back to like, I mean, I guess it's kind of mental health, but like, you know, if you're married, you don't pick the controversial issue that you and your partner have every day and poke at it and say, "What about
yeah,
this? What about this? Let's go back to that. Let's go back to that." Like you move on, right?
yes, right.
Right, we're going to table that because we're not going to agree, but let's work on all these other things. And the
Mhm.
news and the politicians have no interest in having us moving on because those hot button issues are the ones that get them to get funds, the ones that get them to get votes. So they have
Yeah,
no interest in us not paying attention to them, and they certainly have no interest in having those hot button issues be resolved. Why
yeah.
why would you want to resolve it? That's your moneymaker. Why would you want to resolve any of these controversies or get to a point where we can say, look, enough of us agree on how this can go. Let's move on to other things.
Yeah. No, I no, 100% agree. And like while you were talking, I also thought of some things that I want to get your opinion. These are some of my like just takes on different, and it's not going to be about specific policies or anything that related to politics. It's just like the political landscape. And I think you kind of mentioned it about like kind of being vulnerable. And to me, what I've learned is that is one of the most important parts of leadership. And I just want a politician who is a human being. And I think as a human being, we're all flawed. I would just, I think there's got to be a way for politicians to just admit their flaws, admit their mistakes, admit their struggles, kind of tell how they've grown from it. I could vote for that. I could vote for that. Like, I even think about like, even like Obama, like admitting he did cocaine. Like, that was not like I'm not a fan of that, but I like that he said it. I like that he admitted it. Like I can deal with that. And I think I always compare things to sports. And I know you're a Mets fan, right? You said. All right.
Yes, yes,
I'm
yeah.
gonna I'm gonna bring up a Yankee, Andy Pettit. Like when
Uh-huh.
he got caught with the steroids
Yep,
issue,
I remember that.
and he was just kind of like, you know what? Like I was trying to recover from an injury. I did it. Like I did it and that this is why I did it. And everyone was just kind of like, oh, that makes sense. Like, and it kind of just went away as opposed to all those other guys who were denying they were trying to ruin other people's lives. I don't know. Do you think we could ever get to that where guys, instead of denial or deflecting to other people, you can just be like, hey, I did all this and here's why I'm better for it.
I guess I do. I think that one, I just don't know that we're gonna hear about it. Like, because, or if you hear about it, it's already gonna be parsed in a way that's like negative, right? Like,
Yeah, right.
who's Senator, like Fetterman? Is that the guy in
Yeah,
Pennsylvania?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
he disagrees with the Democratic Party, and all of a sudden he's like disloyal and he's a Republican. I saw here the news where, like, Andrew Cuomo is running against this tells you how disengaged I'm from politics, that I
yeah.
can't even like immediately think of the mayor of New York City, Mamdani. And
Yes.
like, all of a sudden Andrew Cuomo is labeled as a Trumpophile, right?
Yeah,
And I think that the media tends to always take the people who kind of like who change their minds or who backtrack on something, and they immediately couch in a negative way. Right. So, and I feel like those backtracks, that's where somebody is admitting with their actions they did something wrong. I mean, like Mike Pence, for all that people might have disagreed with him on, didn't do the thing that Donald Trump had wanted him to do to kind of legitimize his arguments against the 2020 election. And I
yeah,
think in that action, he was saying that I disagree with what we're going. And I like, you know what I mean? So like, I think that we as a population need to also think about how we perceive our politicians. Because I think that in some respects, and this goes back to the idea, like, getting involved ourselves is, I think, and I'd say, like, for me, when I was growing up, I grew up in the 80s, graduated from college in 93. You're kind of led to be like, okay, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to get a good job, I'll take care of my family. And the idea of like being permanently a part of the community and giving back to the community was never something that was a part of like my upbringing. And I'm sure there
yeah,
were others, but regardless, I'd say there needs to be more, because like what I saw is usually the best and brightest, and anybody else for that matter, is kind of is encouraged to go off and become a banker or a lawyer or a consultant. Like, you don't
yeah,
see like the people that are like the ones who might have the most, you don't see enough people, much less some of the brightest people, being encouraged to do things like that. Like, they're encouraged to do those other things, right?
yeah,
And I think, and if nothing else, like, it's fine. You need bankers, you need lawyers, you need, whatever, but we also need people who wanted to, start a not-for-profit that builds civic health, right?
yeah, right, right.
Where people want to be doctors. So I think that, again, I guess I'd go back to the idea of, like, as much as we want politicians to be able to be, I guess, to apologize or to admit truth, we all need to kind of exhale and stop trying to hold our politicians up to these unrealistic standards where, wherever you are on the left or right part of the spectrum, it's like we elect somebody and be like, okay, why didn't you do what you said you were going to do? Well,
Yeah,
because we don't live in a dictatorship.
yeah,
All
you
right.
can't do it.
And
Yeah,
your congressman is one of 500, your senator is one of 100, and the president is still one branch within three branches.
yeah,
So we all engage the government like it's just there to serve our needs whenever we want. And it's a very, I think and again, I think there are certain people that kind of need the government to kind of step up for them. But I think
mhm,
the overall look has to be, while we pay attention to the government and hold it accountable, we can all do a lot more on our own to fix some of the problems. And if we all did that, I think we'd be better off.
yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think, what I talked about it earlier. One of the things that really hit me hard was the whole COVID thing. And there was a lot of political unrest at that time. And one of the things that bothered me, and again, this is not, I know that people died, I know all of that. But one of the things that pushed me, I think, away from just politics and more just like, hey, I'm just going to think my own thing. I'm going to be I'm going to think conservative things and I'm also going to think super liberal things. And like, that's just how I'm going to be. One of the things that bothered me the most was like, I was struggling mentally, like bad. like really bad. I ended up having to be hospitalized. And
Oh
one of the
gosh.
reasons, yeah, one of the reasons why was like I knew it was bothering me. I knew it was bothering the kids that I was teaching. But like if you said that, particularly in the state of Illinois, if you said that at that time, you were like a horrible person. Like the immediate reaction was like, "What? You want people to die?" And I'm like, "No, I don't want people to die, but I do think that there is another aspect that we are not necessarily thinking of." And that really bothered me that people would just kind of like jump on like, "Oh, you're a Trumper, or you just want people to die." And it's like, no, I don't. And I don't think a lot of those people do either. Like, I think it's way more nuanced than that.
Yeah. No, and I, for at the beginning of COVID, like I mean, for me, selfishly, like, I was just thinking in terms of like for my job, like, if we close the city down, all the
Yeah.
restaurants that I work with, they're not going to be working, and that impacts me. Um, but I think, I guess what I'm doing with American Tributaries, and I think what you're doing in trying to reach out and talk to other people and get other ideas is, there's a quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald that who said that, like, the marker of first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing points of view, thoughts at
Mhm.
the same time, and still
Yeah.
be able to kind of function.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and
Yeah.
and I, and I think, like, that, if you can do that, it's you'll be able to, you won't get frustrated with other people, other viewpoints, because you'll be able to step in those shoes and be like, oh, maybe that's why, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that that is, but and I guess I said another one, like, David Foster Wallace, who, I mean, certainly had his own mental struggles which ultimately ended up having him end his own life. But he had this great speech about "This is water." And I mean, fundamentally, he gave it at a commencement for a college, and he really talked about, just again, that ability to understand, because all just the silly things that frustrate you in your day and that aggravate you, and that make you feel stressed, are things that, if you stepped out of your little bubble, you'd realize that there are many different possible explanations for it. It might be the worst case scenario that's in your mind, but there are
Yeah.
also other possibilities. And I think for me, that is what happened. I felt like during COVID, whereas we were being told, if somebody doesn't want this, they are this. They are being
Mhm.
dangerous. They are trying to kill you. That is basically the message we were getting. And that is such an unhealthy way of trying to think about the other possible viewpoints. And like, when I step back now in retrospect, and this is why I try to go to South Carolina, and I'd love to go other parts of the country, is like, we're in New York City, it's like 26,000 people per square mile. Go to
Yeah.
Montana or Wyoming, it's 5 people per square mile. I mean,
Mhm.
should we be surprised that somebody who lives in that kind of setting thinks very differently than us? So to
Yeah.
sit here, to sit at home and get frustrated with the news or frustrated with politics because people who live in a completely different setting than you, might as well live on a different planet, see
Yeah.
differently than you, to get angry and frustrated and disgusted and become hopeless, is just, I mean, it's ludicrous when you step back on and think about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I feel like what I'm doing, and this is why I reached out to you, I felt like is kind of part of why I think what I'm doing is kind of very relevant to mental health. It's that ability to kind of understand the rest of the world in a way that'll make you feel maybe less aggravated and
Yeah.
more compassionate and more curious. And I use four core values: curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. And I would dare say I've done the mental exercises in my head, but I cannot think of a scenario where, if you don't lead with those four core values, you
Yeah.
can't get along with almost anyone. Doesn't mean you're going to agree, and it certainly
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're going to love them, but you can coexist in a productive way.
Yeah, and it kind of brings up what you're just talking about. Like I think of like empathy, but here's what I think from a political perspective in terms of empathy. I think there's sometimes we have like short-term empathy, and even as a teacher, I think sometimes as teachers you make decisions because you want to avoid discomfort. You want to avoid like actually meeting the problem head on, as opposed to, I think there's some decisions that need to be made that are more long term. Like it might not make people happy in that right away, but in the long term, like this is what is good for you. The problem with that is like you don't get credit for that. Like you don't get credit because no one could ever prove the causality that this decision made that happen. Where with like short-term things, or like if letting the problem happen and then coming and fixing it. Like now you can be like, hey, I fixed it. And I think that's one of the problems in politics is I think we constantly look for that short-term fix, specifically for credit, as opposed to
Yeah.
the long-term thing. Like it's hard to prove, but this is what's actually better for our world that we exist in. What are your thoughts on that? Am I an idiot? I don't know.
No, no, I totally get it, and I guess I totally would agree with that notion that, the way again we're conditioned is like more like, well, if you can measure it, then it's good, right? But if you can't measure, like if you're doing something for the long run, I think a picture like how I parent my kids. There are things you do that in the short run don't make any sense, right? But in the long run, I have to absorb this child's anger or frustration because I've got to do this, or you want your kids' grades to go up, and this is a personal thing. So other people have different ways, but like we've never subscribed to the idea of like incentivizing our kids to do well in school with money, because I always felt
Yes.
like once that goes away, because I can't fund
Yeah.
that for the
Yeah.
whole
Right.
life. Like what's going to happen? I just didn't want to take that chance. But I think that in the short term, sure, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, it makes sense. But for the long term, it's not something that I think is sustainable in the long run, because it goes away. But I don't. This doesn't quite tie in with what we were saying, but I read this book and I talked about how like relationships are often a balance of kind of deference and defiance, and
Mhm.
like where like sometimes you just have to let people do certain things, and then sometimes you have to defy them for their own good. And I
Yeah.
think that like for us as a society, for I mean you as a teacher, there are things where it's an art more than it is something. It's not a science, it's an art,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
you get a feel for it. And I'm frankly I'm not that good at kind of the art of knowing when to defer versus knowing when to say no, that's not good. Because
Yeah.
I'm more inclined to be like, no, you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm very lucky to have been married for so long that
Yeah.
I've learned and learned and learned. Well, I haven't learned actually, but that insight was kind of really encapsulated what I think I needed to do. But I think again that goes back to the idea of how you deal with your fellow citizens who you may not agree with front everything, and you have to have a certain element of deference,
Yeah.
and then pick the times when you want to be more defiant about something. But it's an art, and I don't think every time you see somebody do something different than you or disagree with you, you need to be defiant. You
Yeah.
have to, I
Right.
guess, defer.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
okay, I don't understand the situation and I don't have enough energy to get involved, and I'm not just going to shout them down because it frustrates me. I'm just going to move on. Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into exactly what you're doing with your organization, but like it kind of brings up the point, and I think you can complain all you want about. You could. I see all these people who are always complaining, like, and they have all these great ideas, and to me, it's like, okay, do something. Like, actually go and do it. Like, even when I was coaching, sometimes I'd have like assistant coaches. They were idea guys, and I'd be like, okay, do it. Like, implement that. And I feel like what you're doing now is like a do something type of thing. It's not complaining. It's not relying on anyone else to make a difference. Like you are going out and actually doing it and making an impact. And probably, I think you had said it, but like have found a purpose in a way. Like this can be your purpose. And for me as a mental health guy, I can tell you there has been nothing better in my life than finding a purpose for my own mental health and knowing that I'm helping others. Like, take us through exactly like what you're doing when you go on these trips with kids, how you're raising money, all this different type of stuff, like how you're getting it done.
Well, so the first thing in kind of establishing the itinerary for the trip, I kind of looked at I live in New York City, and I was like, if I were to visit a different part of the country, I want to have an experience that would be more broad I mean, expose people to a broader spectrum than like if you come to New York City and you just go to museums and a Broadway show and the Statue of Liberty, you've been to New York, but you don't understand New Yorkers at all.
Yeah.
You haven't connected with me. You don't understand why I live the way I live.
Hmm.
So if we go to someplace else, and I chose South Carolina, um, I wanted to have that kind of exposure. So what drew me to South Carolina was actually a friend who I met through that organization, Braver Angels. He was from Greenville, and and I guess I'd say explain taking kids to South Carolina. I'm taking them on a journey that I've recently completed myself because I knew nothing about South Carolina other than Hilton Head. Um, and when I met this guy Eric Ireland, and he told me he lived in Greenville, I was like, Greenville, where's that? And I looked at it, and it was inland, in South Carolina. And like to me, I was just like anything beyond the coastline, I'm just picturing is all backwoods, right?
Yeah, right,
And
right.
and then when I started looking, I'm like, wait, this is like a real city, and it's got BMW's headquarters there, and it's got Michelin's headquarters there, and wow, and so that was why I drew South Carolina because I'm like, it's there, and it's far enough to be. We take trains where we go because I want
Hmm.
kids to kind of feel the distance, and I want them to see the changing landscape as you go
Good
from north
idea.
to south. Um, but it's close enough to make that trip in a day. And I picked three different areas: Charleston, Columbia, and Greenville. Columbia is the capital. Charleston, everybody knows, and then Greenville was just something I knew nothing about, and I thought let's all go there together.
Yeah.
And then in planning the itinerary, I was like, I want to let's go to some tourist type stuff, but I want to do more than just that. So like when we're in Charleston, we have like a Gullah Geechee cooking experience where you learn like that. I guess Gullah Geechee is like kind of that but is a kind of like I guess the West African culture as it was incorporated by the early American, Black African American slaves, and it continues to this day. So I was like, I want to get them exposed to that. I was like, I want them to meet farmers. We're going to be down in South Carolina. I was in the Navy and the military. In the South, there's I think more of a military presence than up in the North. There's a lot of bases in South Carolina. Let's try to, go to a base. And what I
Yeah.
found is everybody I talked to was, not everybody, most people I talked to were so accommodating and willing to kind of meet with us that it was kind of like those first things where I was like, you know what? In the media bubble that I live in, we're not told that you're going to be, people down south are nice. I mean, you're conditioned with a very limited perspective on how people are based on how the news cherry picks the stories that you get to see.
Yeah.
And what I found was completely different. And I wasn't necessarily surprised, but I was like I was feeling it, right?
Yeah.
And, going down there and having the kids, meet Celeste and George Albers, or I would like to consider like good friends. And to me, they're dear friends because I think, are such an important relationship to me. They've been so hospitable and friendly and accommodating, and they show us their farm, and they're hardworking people. And at one of the Sea Isles, Wadmalaw Island outside of Charleston, and I know their politics are different than mine, but they're good people, and I don't want to put that in like a it sounds like I'm like he'd be condescending when you say that, but
Hmm.
they're good people, and like
Yeah.
most people, a lot of the people that you deal with are good people. You just and I think getting past that initial stereotype is what's been so encouraging and hopeful for me, and seeing the kids kind of go through these experiences and enjoy themselves and come away from it feeling like I guess like almost like depolarized and
Yeah.
seeing the country in a different way.
Hmm.
It means the world for me for them to go on that journey and for their families to go on the journey, much less me.
Yeah. It's kind of fun. Like, it's kind of funny. I was just have you ever been to Lexington, Kentucky? I
I
j-
have not now.
okay. So I
Yeah.
just got back from there, and it's kind of like what you're saying. Like, I have a stereotype of like when I was going down there that I was gonna be like rednecks, like all these people, like they were some of the nicest people. And I'm sure I didn't really get into their politics, but like even when you're driving around, like I saw some things like school names that were questionable in terms of like, it was like a guy who I know in from my limited history knowledge, like was a slave owner and all that type of stuff. And I think if I just looked at that, I could have been like, oh, all these people down here are racist. When really it's like once I'm actually talking to all these people, like they probably don't like that just as much as maybe I don't like that, but like they can't really change it. What they can do is like just be good people. And I even think about like, have you ever been to Iowa?
I have not been to Iowa either. You're revealing all of my, these are
Yeah.
all the places I want to go on my trip to cure myself of these problems.
So Iowa nice. There's this thing called Iowa nice. Like these people are the nicest human beings. And I said this on another podcast, but I went down there to Holy Cross was playing Iowa and the women's basketball, Caitlin Clark, that whole thing.
Hmm.
And like and I feel like people are pretty nice in the Midwest too, but I go into Iowa and like it was like a different world. Like people were coming up to me, like introducing themselves. Like I had all my Holy Cross gear on, and they're like, "Hey, thanks for coming to Iowa City. We really appreciate you being here." And like I was like, "Yeah, we're here just here to get destroyed." And they'd be like, "No, no, you never know. Like Caitlin Clark could get hurt or injured. You never know." And like it was just amazing how nice these people were. And like I'm sure their politics maybe differ than what my thoughts are. But like it's kind of like what you're saying. It kind of broke any sort of stereotype. And I always think about this like all my buddies from Holy Cross or like the Holy Cross people who went out there who are from the East Coast. Like some of my buddies, when they come to Illinois, they're like, I can't believe how nice people are. And then, but if they went to Iowa, they would be like in shock at how nice these people were. I don't know. I just think that's cool what you're kind of giving these kids that experience. Like what have you seen like from these trips with these kids that you're bringing there? Like what difference have you seen afterwards?
I mean, I've seen a difference with my own daughter who was on the first trip in 2022. I think she like we do um for the trip we stop in Washington D.C. for a couple of days as well so that the kid and we actually spend like almost a whole day meeting staffers and interns that work for different congressmen and women. We actually met with somebody in a caucus, one of the caucuses. Um, and I've had kids come away from this being like, I want to get involved in the government. Like my daughter said she wanted to do public policy as a minor in college now. And I don't know whether people do or don't do that, but this goes back to actually one of the things I leave one of the things from with wine is like when I've taught about wine, I don't want somebody to learn about, I mean, I want you to learn about if I'm teaching about red wines or whatever, but I really want you to feel empowered enough with the knowledge to want to be curious about learning more.
Hmm.
And I think what I would want with these trips is for the kids to kind of come away from it like, you know what? Yeah, I'd love to go to Mississippi or Arkansas or Iowa because I've had these limited perceptions of that, and I want to actually go to check it out now because South Carolina was this, but when I went there, it was this, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the best hard example I can give is that like we had one of our students 2 years ago in 2025. She did our trip and then she did a trip to Greece with her school, and she said that our trip was better.
Yeah. No, that is, I mean,
So
that's awesome. And Greece is awesome too. So I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
know. And like what are you doing there? Like I know you like do you have like I know you have an itinerary. Like when you go there, I know you talked about the specific places. Like what exactly are you doing in those places to kind of give these kids that experience?
Well, I guess it's actually, and this is almost a little bit antithetical maybe to how like education can sometimes be because like there can be a push to like I don't know what you call like the teaching plans or not a curriculum, but like
Yeah.
I've had people say like, "What's your like? What are, give them 10 questions to think about," or I don't know what that's called, but like I
Yeah.
was like, I don't want to do that. I want the kids, and I think we all could use this. Is we need to learn how to learn again. So
Yeah.
like what I tell them is like I'm going to ask questions. but unless you want to hear me talking all the time, which trust me, you do not, you've got to ask questions as well. And there's no, and there, and I know it's cliche to say there's no stupid questions, but there really is no stupid questions. So to me, what I find most heartening is when I see the kids start talking with our host and asking questions. Like some girl asked, and this is such a wonderful question. She asked it to Celeste and George. She's like, how do you feel like when you have to kill the chickens because they have a farm and they kill the
Mhm.
chickens, they eat them or they sell it, and that seems like something where it's like, it's such an innocent question, but it's like such a good question to ask about like what are your feelings behind this, and the
Yeah.
fact that so when it was Bella as the student that asked that question, but when I see all the kids do that, like when we were in Charleston, we went to some biscuit shop and we were having lunch, and there was this woman who's a retired teacher who saw us come in, and she said to one of the girls, like, "Are you guys a volleyball team?" And she was like, "No." And they started talking, and by the time we were done with that lunch, all eight of the students were surrounding this retired teacher, talking with her daughter standing there watching. And it was like, I think it was probably one of the highlights for all of us, because it just was this impromptu engagement that was so innocent and so candid and so, I mean, I would say joyful, but just it was so unexpected. And
Yeah.
and that happens, over and over again. Like when one of the last things when we're in Greenville, we go to Cracker Barrel, which in and of itself is a cultural experience for us people in the Northeast because we don't have Cracker Barrels up
Yeah.
here, and we dine with some high schoolers from the Greenville area, and just seeing the kids sit down and start talking. And it's that art of talking. Like we're so worried about screens and stuff, and I don't necessarily think that screens are wrong, but we can't let that be the defining aspect of our human interaction
Yeah.
by any stretch. And just seeing that the kids being able to get that, I just hope those experiences become something that kind of resonates or just echoes in their lives to kind of keep them on that track of remembering how to engage with their fellow human beings. Because I mean, Lord knows, I've forgotten that lesson many times in my life.
Yeah. No, and when you were talking, it kind of made me think like you can be two different things. Like just because you are this doesn't mean that that's all you are. And it kind of I my father-in-law, he actually was never my father-in-law. He died of a heart attack almost like 20 years ago. But
Mhm.
he was one of the toughest people that I've ever met. Like super tough. He worked with his hands. He had like broken fingers all over the place. It's like I was scared of him. I
Mhm.
started dating my wife when I was like 18 years old. I was scared of this dude. But we had this moment once. His father died, my wife's grandfather, and I wrote my what would have been my father-in-law like a note. I wrote him a note and on a card, basically saying how much I respected how much of a family man he was. Like he was a great son, great father, and how much I respected that. And like he pulled me aside after the service and like he like pointed at me and I was like, oh my God, is this guy gonna fight me or is he gonna like call me soft or all this? And he like broke down crying and he was like, that was one of the best things that anybody's ever sent me. Thank you for saying that. And it kind of reminded me like you can still be this tough guy. Like he was tough, like really tough, but you can also like show emotion. And I think the same thing with like you can have a different viewpoint, but you can still be like this good person that you can interact with. I don't know. I just think we need to somehow get to where it's not so vicious. There's not so much division. And I think if we could get your thing going on a even bigger level where more and more people are doing that, I think that's a way to kind of make that happen. So
Yeah.
I think it's awesome.
Well, thank you. And I do, and I think just from the mental health standpoint, I just think that it has been very helpful for me. And I think it is helpful for the people that participate in this because I feel like I'm doing something, they feel like they're doing something, and they feel like they've got that reminder. Like this is what you see in the news and you have to compare it to what your real world experiences and all these kids. And I guess I used to think about like when I was younger, like there are very indelible experiences you have when you're young that you do carry with yourself for the rest of your life. And I'm hoping that they'll remember, sitting out in the sun with the 100-degree temperatures and the 110% humidity outside Charleston, meeting Celeste and George, and George wears a hat that says like God, guns, and Trump,
Yeah, yeah,
and we're seeing the humanity in each other, really. And I think that's, if you start with that, and I know it can be hard, and I know there are things that are important, but they can't be so important that they override the recognition of our common humanity. And that there might be people out there and circumstances where that is, that'll be so hard to do. But 99% of the time, we have a responsibility, I think, to recognize the humanity in other people.
yeah. And then, like, as you were saying this, I keep saying as you were saying this because things you're saying is like resonating with me. Is that I was an athlete, and as like a competitive athlete, I was like, as bad as it is to say, like I hated everyone. Like you just had the mindset of like, I hate this person. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna do this. And I feel like I carried that, not hatred, but like I just didn't want to talk to people. I wanted to do my own thing. And now that I've been doing all this and talking to like you and all these other people that I've been fortunate enough to talk with, I think it's made me such a better person, like interacting with different people, different backgrounds, talking about different aspects of like mental health or whatever they're talking about. I just think it just made me so much of a better person, a more empathetic person. I think if we can get people just realizing that people have other views, that's just a great thing, just for our society in general.
Yeah, and thinking more about mental health as you were talking, one of the things that I guess I would like to say to peers, people who are in their 40s or 50s, is like, at this point in your life, like you've done a certain amount of work, and I think as your kids get older, like you lose the parenting incentive, and then it's like, oh well, what are you going to do? I think there are so many people that are still in the prime of their lives who have a lot of other skills and experiences that they can used to benefit people. And I think we should all try to explore that at some point. And I'm very late to the party with as far as like trying to be aware of like giving back to the community in any way, shape, or form. But I'm glad that I have. And I think that in a day and age when we're all told that, we might be able to live to 100, if you're 50 years old and realizing that, hey, I can do this and help benefit people, then geez, you got about 50, you have a good 30 to 50 years where you can do some real good with all of your professional expertise and life experiences. So to the
Yeah.
extent, you want purpose, I do feel a purpose that I never had. And I feel like a lot of experience that I had that frankly, I don't know, I sometimes felt like very discouraged with what I had done, because I kind of felt like, with the foundations I had laid, I was, for lack of a better word, kind of expecting that I would do more. And
Yeah.
I don't think I have it in a very ostensible sense. I'm very
Yeah.
happy where I am, but I feel like this has been something where all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I feel like I can now flex the skills that I was never able to flex, and really kind of exploit the experience that I've had and make a positive, unequivocally positive impression on people's lives, and it means the world to me. And that I've had so many people supporting, whether it's been money or advice or just kind of welcoming us in South Carolina or in Washington, D.C. for that matter.
Yeah. And Michael, you know what I like about you? It's kind of like my original point with politicians. Like you've admitted, like throughout this time that we've been talking, you've admitted some flaw. Like I was late to the party, or like I wasn't thinking about things the right way. I think it's so hard for some people to admit, like, hey, they're flaws. Or for me, like my struggles, it took me forever to admit that. But I feel like when you do, you create a level of trust with who, not that you want to be like, oh, I did this, like, not that you want to be super negative about yourself, but admitting those things, like, it's like, oh, I can trust that guy. as opposed to like if you're trying to like, say how great you were at everything and blah, blah, blah. Like, I just don't get a good feeling about that person. Um,
Yeah,
I
no.
like how you did that because I think it shows you're like a real person.
Well, this whole I don't this is unrelated to what we were talking about, but it's related to sports. So like there's been this whole thing with like Tiger Woods and the problems he's been having, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the problems when athletes in general kind of go astray is that they are in a profession which is very easy to kind of say how good or bad like they are, right? You're the
Yeah.
best at this, right? But then they're also marketed in a way where they become like superheroes, almost gods, right? Like Aaron
Mhm.
Judge isn't just a basketball player. LeBron James isn't just a basketball player. He's King LeBron. He's the
Yeah.
king,
Yeah. You're right.
right? And we start doing that. We start elevating them to these standards that are like that aren't attainable, but then they also don't push back on that, right?
Yeah.
They
Right.
kind of let themselves be exploited in that way, and they just start believing it or not. It doesn't make a difference. So I feel like in some respects, like I don't know, to me, I feel like that's part of it's hard to say we have to accept people's flaws if you can't admit your own flaws.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, and I would say really it goes the most simple thing is to be curious is admitting you don't know something,
Yeah. No,
right?
exactly.
And what I found is like when we're down in South Carolina and we meet people. I remember this one time I forget who I was talking to, but I'd mentioned to South Carolinian that we went to Fort Jackson, um, Army base, and they were like, "How'd you get on Fort Jackson?"
Yeah.
And I was like, I got on because I saw that I had a museum there, and I asked if I, could go visit the museum, and then I pushed my luck and said, "Would you give us a tour?" And they said yes. And they're like, "Wow!" So they're like, "So when you're talking to me, you're actually really curious. Like you're willing
Yeah.
to not only admit that you don't know something, but that you're trying to cure yourself, and your actions are backing up what you're saying."
Mhm.
And I don't say that to pat myself on the back, but I say that, I guess, to say like if you can embrace that humility to say I don't know things, it makes the
Mhm.
world so much more interesting.
Oh, yeah. No, exactly. I think that's great. And I guess like what I wanted to I know we're kind of running a little long here, but I've enjoyed the conversation. That's why
Yeah,
we're
same.
running long. But I guess my last question I want to ask you, like people who are listening to this right now or who are watching it, like what would be your I know it's hard to boil it down to one thing, but what would be your number one piece of advice when we're talking about this civic responsibility, political being discourse, being able to communicate with other people who think differently than you? What would be like a hack? Is there any sort of hack that you could think of that could help people do that?
Man, I think I don't the hack I guess would just be like really like just I don't know if it's a hack at all because there's no short term.
Yeah.
It's not a simple solution, but I'd say if you give yourself license to just be like I want to think about other things I can do on the side, and then just kind of you have time and you can make a difference. And I think more I'd say just believe in your ability
Hmm.
to make a difference and give yourself time to do it. And you do have the ability. I mean, like, I don't sit around and watch much TV after, we wash dishes and get the kids settled for whatever. But like I spend my nights working on this project, and my wife and I will have a couple shows we watch or watch a movie, and like we do things, but like my free time is spent doing this. So I would say one, you have the time and the ability, just believe that you can make a difference, and then just take those first steps. And then I'd say just consider it like if you're in a midlife crisis, like this is the answer. Like, get
Yeah,
yourself a
right.
little notebook, start networking, start talking to people. And even the journey itself is so rewarding to just talk to people and be like, hey, I've been tooling around with this idea of, teaching, after school classes about, artificial intelligence, or I've been wondering if I can make something to help kids learn how to budget their money better, or whatever it is. There's so many things things you can do, and you don't have to come up with the idea tomorrow, and you can have one idea and it can change and it can slowly evolve. But grab yourself a notebook, start going on LinkedIn and look for people that you can talk to. And it's the greatest excuse in the world to say, hey, I'd love to meet for a cup of coffee or for a Zoom or for whatever, and just chat with you about this idea that's kind of banging around in my head, and let
Yeah,
it
well,
evolve.
yeah, and even like just what you're mentioning there, like you reached out to me. I think you saw one that I did was someone that you were connected to, and then you reached out to me. And I had, like I said at the beginning, there was a little bit of, not in you in general, but there was concern that I didn't want this to be like, going one side or the other. And we got on the phone, and then I talked to you. And I'm like, oh yeah, this would be perfect because like you were kind of this belief, like you got to be able to listen to both sides and be able to talk to different types of people. Um, but like we would have never gotten to that point if you just hadn't, reached out. And
Yeah,
I found that too. Like I've reached out to certain people, like the worst they could say is no.
right,
Um,
right. And you're
but
exactly where you were anyway.
yeah, right. So like I get what you're doing with that, and I would encourage you to continue. And I know you're going to continue to do it anyways without my advice, but I just think it's a very valuable thing, especially for someone who teaches, younger people, high school age kids. Like I think giving them an opportunity to do something like this is more of an education than they'll get from a lot of other things that they do in school.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it complements also, like, and I think that's part of it. Like, you go to school to learn different things, establish a base set of knowledge, find out, maybe some things that you're good at, or that you have fun learning. But we also have to return to the idea of learning about us as citizens and being a part of a larger, like, kind of civic ecosystem. And I think what I should have said when you talked to me about, like, we're going to talk about politics or whatever, is I think at the end of the day, my mantra would be we have to focus more on not, we have to focus more on how we believe and focus less on what we believe.
Yeah,
I
that's a
think
good
that's
line.
what this is about.
That's like a mic. I say there's mic drop moments. I like that line. I've never heard that before, but that's like a mic drop moment. I guess last thing I wanted to do is just where could people, we talk about reaching out to people. Like where could people find you or
So,
find your organization to learn more about it?
yeah, so our website is just www.americantributaries.com. We're on Instagram as well at American Tributaries. And if somebody wants to email me, they can just can send a message to MJ Whiddon, at americantributaries.com. Um,
Yeah.
but it's I appreciate the chance to kind of talk to you about this, and I just would say, like, just for anybody, you can. I think a lot of our anxiety is because we're confronted with so much that we just don't know enough about, and we feel helpless. And I just encourage people to believe and embrace the fact that you can do more than you think, and you can make a positive difference. And if all of us make a positive difference on 10 people that we wouldn't have otherwise made a positive difference on, we will be much better off.
Awesome, Mike. Well, I appreciate how I end every episode. I always say something along these lines. I say, thank you for coming on and sharing your story. Because what I have found is that by sharing my story, not only can I impact and help others, but I end up helping myself. And that's the Melee way.
All right. Well,
Thank
thank you very
you.
much.
Yeah, that was